Hey, it's Kevin Coyne. Welcome back to another VO Weekly, Venture Outfitter Weekly. Today, we're going to talk about food security and how that ties into shared prosperity. People should eat. I'm going to tell you why we're using the words people should eat. But I wanted to make sure that welcome everyone to the Venture Outfitter. Venture Outfitter is a program from the Tech Ranch where we're working with entrepreneurs of all types around the world, driving opportunities around supporting each other, driving shared prosperity. And I want to make sure I mention really quick one of our sponsors here at DuoWorks. Many of you know that that I started Austin's first co-working space and then sold it to a woman by the name of Linda Blackman, and she continues to run that space and host the Tech Ranch. So Tech Ranch is tied to 4 different locations across Austin, but we actually make our home here at 183 in Mopac. And if you have a specific need, if you're international even and you're not looking for co-working, but you need a physical point of presence in Austin, one of the places to do it is at DuoWorks. And because Linda is a battle-hardened entrepreneur, she does all sorts of special deals for entrepreneurs based on what you're looking for. Thank you, Linda, for being our host. Venture Outfitter, you're always welcome to be involved in the VO community. The VO community is the Venture Outfitter community. That's our wider net that there's no charge for. But then if you want to take advantage of certain benefits of the membership on getting involved in it, like when I get asked, hey, review my pitch and all that sort of stuff, and I'm like, you really need to do the following things. We do that as part of that process. Please join us and in the VO network, and we'll make sure that that link is available in the show notes for you if you need it. Coming soon on January 6th, which is our next week's VO network, VO Weekly, we're going to have kicking off the new year, a community conversation. One of my favorite things that we do is just have, all these different entrepreneurs speaking about what's going on, and the general planning of what you're doing for the new year is going to be next week's topic. And so come on out. We'll be announcing the next few weeks of programming. We're going to allow the year to have a little bit of a slow start because, it's like, okay, let's take advantage of the 2021 was a big mess, 2020 as well. Okay, kicking off a new year, but we'll see you on the 6th and make sure that you can interact with us there. But today, we want to talk about food security and this whole notion of people should eat. Now, people ask, I already got a couple of questions of, where did this idea of people should eat? Why am I saying that? Well, there's one of our guests that I think we'll end up having in the session today is a young man that did his background. His name is Aiden Nervain. He's the nephew of my best friend. And make a long story short, he was remarking as he moved to Austin about what he wanted to see happen with his career as he's building one part of his career, how he really wanted to have impact. And it ties into this whole idea that what we're here for is to help drive shared prosperity around the world. Many of you know that I've been in 26 countries in the last 5 years, including that year and a half of summer vacation that I didn't get to travel anywhere. And the one binding thing, whether it's been working with governments or entrepreneurs in all these different countries around the world, I guess I should say 26 plus 1, so that would be 27 countries if you include the United States. The one binding vision is this idea of let's drive shared prosperity. And one of the things about that is food security. And there's the personal story about this. This is my mom, my sister, and myself at a very young age. And the reason that this is important to me is I remember as my mom struggled, being a single mom at a time in a place where being a single mom was not really well accepted in the 70s in San Antonio, Texas. And my mom did her very, very best to take care of us. And there are also times that we didn't have food on the table. Now, thankfully, there's a couple different things through our church and other things like that made it possible that we ended up getting by. But, I wouldn't be telling the full story if I didn't tell you it wasn't extremely difficult as I reflect on what my mom had to do to put food on the table. And so there's a couple of entrepreneurs that I've gotten to work with that really are taking on this food security issue. And I'm happy to actually be, at least at some tangential level, an advisor to their organizations because they're doing important work. And I want to introduce you to them. Part of the other thing to say, though, is everyone now has been hit with food security issues. At least everyone that's been affected by the COVID economy, which is most of the world. And then if you were in Texas back in February during what we call the snow apocalypse, where everything was shut down, you probably experienced this idea of going into a store and having no food available, no toilet paper, no food, no basics available. You probably experienced this, even if you're really, really, really well off. So in that frame, let's talk about food security and two of the pioneers that are driving this forward. First is Joi Chevalier. She, and I'm always concerned that I'm mispronouncing her name, and so she's going to correct me.
No, it's lovely.
But Joi is a successful entrepreneur that has a background in e-commerce and software development and software product management that I met when she went through one of our Venture Forth programs years ago, who's doing some really interesting things. I'm going to go ahead and introduce as well. Jodi Lane is the Executive Director of the Fruitful Commons and is a co-founder of the Festival Beach Food Forest. So she's got a background in working with cities on architecture issues and different things like that. She might even tell us a little bit about what's happening at the city of Austin historically. And so recently, as I was just had some free time, I was looking around on the net of what's happening. What are the other things happening in Austin about food security? This has been about 6 months ago. And, up popped this really amazing video of how they're taking one of the Austin's parks and turning it into a place where you can just walk into this food forest, reach up, grab something off the tree and eat it. And it's just amazing. So, part of what I actually want to make sure that we share about is the work that they're doing. What I'm going to try to do, though, is get out of the way and have them tell the story because they are the story. We'll start with Joi, just because Joi's got the backgrounds, and I've known a little bit longer and stuff like that. And I think one of the we'll call the original gangsters of this type of work. Joi, welcome to the VO Weekly, and
Thank
so excited.
you.
Always honored to be in your presence, and I
Oh
always
my
learn from
gosh.
you every time I see you.
You are too much. Thank you all. Thanks for having me. And good morning, everybody. And yeah, Happy New Year and stuff.
Well, so tell me a little bit about what are you doing with the Cook's Nook,
Sure.
and what is it that I mean? Tell a little bit about the
Yeah.
inspiration for what you've created, and what is the Cook's Nook? Why does it exist?
Sure.
And things like that.
Sure. So Kevin's right. I met him while I was transitioning from, well, by the time I get to end of this, you realize I'm still a product manager. From, 18 years as a technical product manager to owning my own company. I used to have a running statement that I would use in meetings because, meetings can get really intense, especially when it's your product meetings. Um, and I used to have a line that I would try to remind people, to calm down a little bit. And I would say, we are not putting shoes on children. We are not curing cancer. And we are not, feeding our unhoused. So everybody needs to sit down. It's just widgets. We sell widgets, right? When you're ultimately end of the day, whether you're doing software or hardware, we're selling widgets, right? And it just so happened one year, and I used to own all of authentication, personalization, customization on Dell.com. That was my last stop globally and driving all of those experiences. And I finally, another meeting, and I made the same statement. We are not putting shoes on children. We are not curing cancer. We're not feeding. And literally, I caught myself in the middle of the statement and went, well, why am I not doing those things? And how do I do those things? And why not? Why am I still doing this and creating products and helping a company, businesses create products? Is there another way to do that and use those talents and use those skills? And yeah, then I started thinking about where that would be. And then it ended up being, in food, someplace that I already had passionate interest in, and said, okay, how could I combine food and technology? And at the time, there was a real gap sort of in food to sort of try to bring in the sort of culinary ecosystem here, the food, let's be bigger and say the food ecosystem here, about how do you bring products to market? How do you bring the entrepreneurs to market, and show them that there is a rigorous way, there is a paradigm, there's many paradigms to follow to get their product to market, food products to market. And so that began sort of the sort of iteration and sort of thinking around the Cook's Nook. And I continued my global technical product strategist role, and I would go to culinary school in the evening. I decided that I needed to figure this out and what did it look like to be in that space and environment. And so I would work 7:30 to 4, you know, being all dressed up, my black pants, shirts, jacket, blazer, and yada, yada, yada. And then at 4 o'clock, I would jump into my car, change shirts, and voila, come out, at a culinary school, and do that from about 5 to midnight. And I did that for the better part of a year. And sort of said, okay, and this is what it is. And that's what the Cook's Nook was. It's a culinary hub it's a hub for culinary business. That's what we call it, because, over the years, we've even expanded, right? So we help entrepreneurs, and these are folks who are doing CPG, consumer packaged goods, or whether they're caterers, there are folks in beverage, we've had folks in wellness. Doesn't matter. They're trying to bring a product to market. And there are ways we bring products to market and try to do that in some sort of structured manner, right? That's exactly what the product manager does. And then, so how do you bring that to culinary? And so, not just our entrepreneurs, but also showing potential investors and interest. This is where you'll find everybody. This is where you'll find that knowledge and that intellectual heft that we talked about, because that would be a specialty in the specialty area. So yeah, that's what we focused on, and it eventually added corporate services to that. Still work with large brand companies on trying to help some of them get to market and talk about what it means to get to market. Even though they're in the market, you'd be surprised at what a $10 billion company has forgotten how to do. Let's put it like that. They've forgotten how to do, because they can spend all the money in the world. And so some things are not so rigorous when you have a lot of money in your pocket. And then lastly, and this is what Kevin and Jodi referred to, at the beginning of COVID, I was an early, what's the word? We need a word for people who get COVID. COVIDeers?
That sounds, I
You know,
don't know, COVID missionaries. I'm sure
yeah,
it's a mess.
yeah, I'm not sure. But last March, I guess it would have been, I did have COVID, and so I was at home, and decided that there was still a gap, and that was the gap of specifically towards creating a high quality food product that could be used, prepared meal product that could be used in early COVID adopters. I like that. Um, that could be a prepared meal product that could be used under emergency circumstance. And what does that look like? And I wrote up a proposal that was a prepared meals program to go alongside a shelf-stable program, packaged shelf-stable dry goods, like what the food bank and others typically do. And there was another proposal on the table about how to help farmers that another group had proposed. And my proposal, that product got accepted. It became, by Travis County, it became what's known as the CFAN program, which is the Supplemental Emergency Food Access Network, that uses our space. At the time, it was multiple spaces and capacities of shared facilities a really depressed food supply chain. If you remember last March, everything was closed. People tend to think that most food moves through a restaurant, but in truth, it moves through your hospitals, your institutions, your venues, your hotels. So your large folks also had shut everything down. And so your supply chain had a ton of food in it that was just available. Yeah.
Yeah, you're saying that there was the supply chain. There was a lot of food that was available, but it wasn't getting to the
Yeah,
end.
there were no buyers, right? There
Yeah.
were no buyers for that food. That system, that spigot was fully on, but there were no buyers. And so, a lot of those companies, your large companies like Cisco, US Foods, Benny Keith, by the second week of March, third week of March, last year, their sales were off 70%, right? Your supply chain for food just hit a wall, and this food is just sitting there. And so I made that was part of the proposal. How do we not only create a high quality, high nutrition food that can go out to people and audiences that could not take advantage of a box stable, a shelf stable box product. Because some people can't. We have audiences here that are immunocompromised, they're students, they're in recovery, they're youth, there are folks who are caregiving to others, folks who simply don't have utilities, who don't have access, who don't have transportation. Of course, we know these are inextricably linked, food, transportation, and housing. And then, of course, that also included our unhoused. And so that became that program. And from that, we've grown an entire company around high quality meals, prepared meals that are affordable and accessible. And that's what we do. And we've gone from a company of, 3 to 5 to a company of about 25. Spent a lot of time on the food policy board, and also with our conference that Jodi mentioned, which we try to bring folks together in business, for-profit and nonprofit, to sort of say this is the only way you're going to be able to solve any of these large ecosystem challenges we have in Travis County. So that was a long-winded way of talking about a whole bunch of stuff.
Well, so tell me though, like one of the things there was a number. You haven't shared the actual number of meals that were processed per day, and I know it was
Sure.
impressive.
A few numbers about Travis County. Travis County being, one of the wealthiest counties in the United States, has about 24% of its children are food insecure, our last numbers, and about 18% of adults. Those are higher than the national average. And they're not insignificant. A lot of folks had made headway in the city and amongst the nonprofits that actually see clients, people, to try to drive those numbers down in the previous years. And they had sort of been ticking downward. But by 2018, 2019, and definitely
Looks like maybe we got the Joy hung just for a second. By what was the last couple of words you said, Joy?
Oh, I was just saying that we know by 2019, 2020, 2021, those food insecurity numbers have risen after a couple of years of bringing them down.
Got it. And during that time, so I
Oh,
remember.
and you asked about the number of prepared meals. At this
Yeah,
point,
how many meals were actually consumed on a daily basis? It's like a pretty high number when people don't realize.
people don't realize that we ourselves at one point, we still do, we do about 10,000 meals a week. At one point, we were doing nearly 14,000 meals a week. And that went out to a variety of organizations right now. In that particular program, there's about 37 nonprofits in that who receive meals daily. About 2,000 meals go out from us a day or so, 2,200. It just depends on their schedules, their days, their volunteers, and how they work that. And so we schedule all of that with the nonprofit in that particular instance. But not just and so just through that program alone, there's probably been about 550, 600,000 meals that have gone out over the last year and a half, prepared meals that go out, family meals and individual meals. And On top of that, we're in a couple of other channels. That's what we call our public work with cities, municipalities, school districts. We're also in an institutional channel where we try to work with Medicare, Medicaid, and that's a growing channel for us as we provide meals that are tailored to particular dietary concerns and issues, and that causes our meal set to continue to grow. We just added 20 plant-based meals to our menu sets, and care facilities, things of that nature. The third channel we're in, we are in some e-commerce retail. There are a few stores you can find us in where our meals are available for this year. And then we still work privately with individual foundations who also make requests. So there are about 4 channels that our meals are starting to go through as the company grows and expands, because we don't have anybody in this region or in the state or, in this area. And I say area, I'm talking about this Texas, New Mexico, Louisiana, Oklahoma, this region of the US, not just the region of Texas, because that's for sure. Who is doing this? There are a few companies who want to be in this space.
Oh, looks like we got you
Meals
hung.
that- yeah, just dealing with hunger as a social determinant of health.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's one of the most important things as I, work with my own family on how do we actually keep everyone taken care of and all that sort of the stuff. It's interesting time. Well, so let's do this. I want to make sure that I'm going to go ahead and introduce Jodi into the mix, and we'll hear about the Fruitful Commons and the food forest. And then part of what I know that we were doing before we started recording was the conversation that was even happening between the two of you, because I think that that's what's most interesting about how here are entrepreneurial ventures, not a government, not something else, that are actually standing up and creating solutions. So let's hand it over to Jodi. Jodi, tell us about the food forest, the fruitful commons that you're working on, and what you're up to as well. And so that we have kind of this contrast and complement to what Joi is talking about as well.
Yeah, and what I was saying, before we started recording is it's just so incredible to be in the space, with Joi. I just really have admired her for years, and some of the food distribution that she's, excuse me, referring to is actually going to our project. We have a senior senior living center right next to our project. And since COVID hit, we've been getting lots of meals through the programming that Joi has been putting together. So just really exciting. And it's exciting to be in this conversation of entrepreneurs, and for-profit companies, doing social good. I really appreciate that work. So let me, I do actually have a set of slides, and I guess I could start there and then maybe get some questions answered about, if it's relevant, like my background and how I got into this. But I think I'd love to put Fruitful Commons kind of front and center and be a little bit of a contrast, I guess. Yeah, well, let me just do this and see where we
Sounds
go.
great.
Yeah. Okay, can you see that slide?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So what we are about is reconnecting people to growing food, nature, getting back into nature, being stewards of nature, and then communities connecting with each other. We view, as Joi was saying, Austin's fragile food system and social and economic injustices and increasing climate emergencies as part of a larger system. It's all interrelated. We've got a lot of challenges, and you can't really piece them apart. People that are historically marginalized are at greater risk of this kind of a system that's at play. And today I'd like to tell you about one parcel of land in Austin that we think is really kind of setting the stage and is a proof of concept to take on this large system from the local level, the neighborhood level, and making an impact that way. So this one project that centers around community-led agriculture It minimizes food insecurity and maximizes good health by increasing people's access to fresh produce. It also regenerates, regenerates soil and manages stormwater, mitigating the impact of extreme weather events. And it strengthens community fabric by bringing diverse neighbors together. And Fruitful Commons is poised to develop an agricultural green workforce or green new jobs to amplify this solution. So we are the visionaries of what's already here. Is there's already a Fruitful Commons. There's over 70 community-led gardens, not necessarily farms, though there are some farms that we're working with, but community-led for community projects throughout the city. There's about 72 is what we've identified. And a lot of those are community gardens, and people think it's this nice idea, it's a sweet idea, you know, community gardens and neighbors growing and sharing food, but really it's hard work. And right now it doesn't significantly impact food insecurity. You know, that when we talk about food systems, you don't see this kind of effort in the food system. And we're saying, let's get it in the food system planning, because it really can have a big impact on food insecurity. So what we're doing to support it is to provide financial and back-end administrative support. We're building a resource hub. We're directing mini grants equitably. We're distributing surplus harvest to food pantries and other places that are in need. And we're helping to navigate really challenging land agreements, all the while developing like I mentioned, a green workforce. And we've had some focus groups that we've been talking to, and they say, yes, we need all of the support. And so today we can invite you, anybody that's listening, to help us grow this Fruitful Commons. And we aim in the first half of 2022 to raise $440,000 to continue our work. So we're focusing our work on the most disenfranchised communities in the city, what we call the Eastern Crescent. 16% of Austin families living east of I-35, and you see I-35 there. It's really a Jim Crow era dividing line, and we could talk all day about that. But
we talk about all day about redlining.
Oh my goodness, and redlining. So we're focusing on, like you can see, east of that line, this area these people are facing the highest rates of food insecurity and diet-related health challenges in the city. And another not so common or talked about fact when we're talking about food insecurity, though, like I said, it's all interrelated, is that the tree canopy in East Austin is on average 3.5 times smaller than the tree canopy west of I-35. So what that means is there's more heat islands, more flooding, more destructive climate events impacting these communities disproportionately, just not having trees. So this one special project in East Austin that we feel is a game changer and a model is a coalition between Fruitful Commons, which is the kind of 501c3 umbrella, and the Serafina Food Pantry at the Rebecca Baines Johnson Senior Tower, the Festival Beach Community Garden, and then this innovative new kind of idea. Well, it's not really new, but it's a project on city parkland. So it's on the public commons, and it's called the Festival Beach Food Forest. Some people are like, what is a food forest? You know, sometimes we say, you know, think of a community garden and then take away the fences. It's open to the public, but that's not all it is. Really, food forestry is an ecosystem approach to food production. And it's been practiced for centuries. That's why I say it's not new. This is just not new. It's just what makes sense in your climate. And right now, food forestry is seeing a revival in all over the country, all over the world. We're hearing more and more about more food forests popping up that are just like this one at Festival Beach. And this community is, you know, working to build its own climate resilience and its own food sovereignty for everyone. So we're, you know, for every acre, we can talk a lot about metrics. You know, we're sequestering carbon, absorbing pollutants, releasing oxygen. Like I said, we're also managing stormwater runoff, so it's less flooding in the area, flooding of homes, and increasing the tree canopy. But there's lots of things you can't measure. These folks here at Festival Beach, the deep relationships that have formed are just extraordinary. In the best of times, we're coming together and we're growing food and we're harvesting and celebrating. But in the hard times, like the power outages of the snowpocalypse, Winter Storm Uri, Farda Rivera, she's there in the upper left. She is the founder of Serafina Pantry at the RBJ Senior Center. And she sounded the alarm that the seniors at the RBJ Tower didn't have access to heat or food during the freeze. Like no heat, no electricity, no food. So she sounded the alarm, and the surrounding neighbors and the Festival Beach volunteers brought in truckloads of food and supplies. We connected to Safe Table and others to bring some food in. But these volunteers hauled meals up 16 flights of stairs for 4 days to get the seniors this food. So, it's these authentic relationships that you can't measure. Like, how do you measure that kind of stuff? The relationships that are formed when you sound an alarm and people come, it makes the most difference during emergencies. And we like to say that it's not always the police or the fire departments who can be the first responders. It's really often, it's our neighbors. So exciting news, our coalition, the Fruitful Commons, the community garden, the pantry, and the food forest, we applied for the Thriving Cities Challenge grant, and it was 52 teams across the country, 52 other coalitions doing all kinds of amazing work, like really good work. We were shocked and surprised that we were awarded the top prize. $100,000 was great to have. I think more than that, it's the validation, that something we're doing here at a very local level is on the right track. So what we're going to do with some of this funding is to support the construction of an education pavilion and a community table for potlucks. And neighbors can come together and strengthen relationships. We see it all the time. They're coming together to cultivate food sovereignty and learning about medicinal herbs, saving seeds, all kinds of great educational events that we have, and sharing culturally appropriate meals, straight from the garden. So some of the money will go to that outdoor pavilion. Some of the funds will use to hire the first ever paid staff at Festival Beach. So we're starting to get enter into that green new jobs. And we asked the other garden leaders in our focus groups, that 70 plus, is this kind of support something you need? And they were overwhelmingly saying yes. Many of these people that are leading these community-led agriculture projects are working long hours or have a couple of jobs, especially in East Austin. They have families, they're overstretched. So if we can give this kind of support, we're going to be able to really amplify and create a network, that can do this work as a network as compared to kind of one-offs throughout Austin. And we're finding that there's funding out there. We're tracking hundreds of thousands of dollars in grants from local, state, and national sources, and a lot of private corporations are starting to become interested in this kind of work. So what we're looking for now is, organizations and not only just grants, but we would like to get more into the for-profit realm to get our, maybe sponsor a grant writer so that we can channel all these funds that we're seeing. Other ways to help is to underwrite our staff and programming expenses to leverage and amplify this proof of concept. And this is our team. We've got a team of really skilled folks, lots of experience, and we invite you to connect with us.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. It's like you're saying, these community connections between people in the land, people in food, and then just actually having all that resilience. I'm very proud to have that happening in Austin, Texas, and I was real excited to know about your project. Well, let's do this on some of the follow-on questions. Why don't we turn off the slides, and I would like to just, I mean, I know that between Joi, Jodi, and myself, we could actually have just a conversation that I'm like totally interested in, and we have and we only have so much time. Tell us, I mean, what I know that both of y'all have different reflections about each other, and so I'd almost want to toss the next question between the two of y'all, just to see how it how that shows up. The the main thing about it is what do we need to do to expand food security in Austin from the standpoint of the work that you're doing, and food security being not just people have a meal, but people have the correct meal, the right time, the connection, the community connection that actually makes it happen. What are your reflections, especially with going from the standpoint you already know each other? What?
Yeah, I you want me to go first, Jodi?
Yeah, please.
So, from the Food Policy Board perspective and in the Regional Planning Committee, Austin, Austin is really behind some regions in the U.S. of having a very broad and expansive food ecosystem. And I use food in its broadest sense, right? That is corporates that are here that are in the food business. They bring a certain energy and a certain finance that makes other things possible, right? That's not a sector that has been really pushed or developed very well. Everything here has grown organically. Before COVID, food and beverage is technically was on a track to be about a $6 billion business here in Austin, grown by its own, right? But and we see in other parts of the US concerted ecosystem development efforts to support their regions. In Vermont, developing the finance structures, encouraging the finance structures, the large business and the small businesses, and giving them a very clear path. Vermont's food plan was 10 years, I believe, Jodi, that it was 10 years to develop an ecosystem in the New England area that included academics, entrepreneurs, larger business, nonprofits, and to a mechanism that works and helps to feed that region. And we haven't done that here. And we're, technically now the 11th largest city in the United States, though most of us think that is severely undercounted. We're probably actually 10th. Some say 9th. And we don't have those structures here. It's all still piecemeal and organic. We feed people not through a concerted effort, an intentional effort, let me say. We try to help ensure food by the efforts of individuals, and that's not sustainable. That's not a thing. That's a patchwork quilt of a whole bunch of us, with Jodi thinking about the existing land and forest, right, and how to make that available and accessible, or us going ahead and taking on the supply chain and trying to prepare meals and make sure those get out the door, or whether what the food bank is doing, or one of the biggest feeders of folks in Travis County is your school districts, and they know exactly who they have to feed, and that includes folks who students and their families who are taking advantage of things like reduced lunch, X, Y, and Z. And school districts can only feed the kids. So there's no way to feed those parents. They're adjacent. And we know when kids are in these programs, their parents are likely hungry because they're foregoing meals. And so, without that structure and without that ecosystem in place, we all know that this is what we're doing is not sustainable. So there's been a thoughtful effort, a little slower than many of us would like, by the Office of Sustainability and our food policy manager, plus, our policy boards, individuals, to say, how do we make a mechanism that runs, right? How do we do that? And what does that look like? And what are all of our parts to play in that? So not only do you have the food policy board, but you also have the what's called the Regional Planning Committee, that's been trying to needle through this and have people realize that food and access to food and food's relationship to housing, right? And I think you said it right, Kevin. It's not just the food itself, a culturally appropriate food itself, but it's also the access to that food and at the right time. You have to have different foods at different times. And how do we have a mechanism? So that's going to take more than just us and food, actually, in fact. And so that's, again, a long-winded answer to say there are pieces that are missing here, significant pieces that are missing. And we're at some I believe we're at some very early stages just trying to get those mechanisms in place. It's not going to help us much if you just drop a Kellogg, the chamber goes out and gets Kellogg's to show up here, right? There's still something missing. And that's what we're still trying to figure out how to put together.
Wait, perhaps is there anything, since a lot of what happens with this program, especially the video that gets captured afterwards, is pointing some attention at that. Like if we were to shine a light on anything that maybe the collective community could actually do, is there anything that you would make a request to the community that would support that whole process of getting more exposure?
Oh, Jodi, I'll let you talk about that one.
Well, like you said, the Office of Sustainability, Edwin Marty and his crew is really working hard to develop, community engagement strategies, to get more people aware of what they're up to, what our larger food system is all about, all of the components. So, as soon as we kind of know when those meetings are and those conversations, like that would be a good way for people to get involved.
Yeah, the Food Policy Board meets every month, and that's posted on the city's website in the Office of Sustainability. There is the Regional Planning Committee, which is going to have advisory committees and others for that. But I would ask people to think about what is their lane that they could bring to the table that's missing, that connects the pieces and the dots of an ecosystem of that size. And then go to those meetings wondering what your business, your company, or your organization does, how that would fit in. I think, again, people really thought about food in terms of restaurants. And part of what's happened over the last few years is to say, that's not just, that's an end life of food. That's the end of food, right? Of a stream of food. But there's way more to a food ecosystem than do you have restaurants that are open. And there's got to be multiple ways to make food, even if that's walking outside into a food forest and pulling food off a tree, right? And that's what we have to try to figure out how to put together in this region. Less than 1%, and I'm being generous, of our food that's consumed in Travis County is made in Travis County. And that was the tragedy of Storm Uri, is that you had people who didn't understand that our food that gets eaten in Travis County comes in on trucks. It comes in on I-35, and then it's distributed by these large companies, or even the smaller distributors, right? And if they can't get here, you have no food. And so the lack of planning around that in Storm Uri was disastrous. And everybody knows it, because people don't put together food and transportation they're this. Yep. They're this.
If you're not growing locally, for sure.
Yeah, if you're not growing locally, yeah.
Have enough farm share is another place to look. Farm share is really starting, and Sustainable Food Center really trying to pull more than 1% of our food, not on trucks, but locally grown. And our project is really trying to get the education. We know we're not going to be able to feed everyone in mass, but in every neighborhood, if you have a work day where your kids and you are getting your hands in the soil, you're understanding how the natural systems work, you can see for your own eyes, something growing, and then, that's what happens when there's snow, or climate change of any way, just natural summertime, you see what happens. So just educating us back again to a couple of generations ago when people had gardens. In East Austin, we figured out through talking to everybody for years and years that East Austin used to be a mecca for growing food, gardens, fruit trees. that's a way that the community even connected. You know, the moms would call each other up and say, I've got too many peaches on the tree, send the boys. And the boys would come running with the baskets and pile in the peaches and then distribute it to the community. So there's just a knowledge about food and saving seeds and food sovereignty that we've lost. So if we can generate these community hubs throughout every community where it's not just growing a little bit of food, but it's learning things like, oh, 1% of our food is grown. And wait, what is the Office of Sustainability doing? Like a hub where that kind of information gets shared, just in a space where people are playing music maybe and having a potluck. Like it's creating that venue for that kind of learning about your community.
And I think that's why Jodi brought up our conference, because it was one of the first sort of times to sort of say en masse with, and we knew a lot of people who attended our conferences, we've had 2 now, to have this conversation and to see each other and know where each other fits in, so that when we do, some of us, do fit in, these committees, whether it's Food Policy Board, regional or others, we can start to say, okay, here's a map. I mean, even a basic map is a challenge, right? Of who's doing what, where, when, why, and how are all those things funded, financed, and related to each other, and where they need to be related to each other better, or we need to find capital and organizations who focus on that. And there are some, and that's how Michigan's Good Food Program, in that region, they have dedicated capital companies and organizations who are in there as a part of that. And so, yeah.
That's one of the things I love seeing too, is how there's learning. I love how the examples, and I want to bring the reflection to the community of people that are watching what we're saying about how even the examples that both of you have given, you're looking at examples from around the world. You know, a lot of people look to Austin right now for information about entrepreneurial, technology entrepreneurship and stuff like that. And, I think we got that figured out, but obviously with a 24% of kids having food insecurity here, we got to learn something else. So it's interesting to bring in the examples from Michigan. I know that we have entrepreneurs that are with us in the core Zoom audience, and then also on LinkedIn, that are from around the world too, that might have input as well. What I want to do, just given our time, is I want to make sure that if anyone has a question, signal me by putting something in the chat about it, and then what we'll do is we'll actually have individuals speak directly. But Joi and Jodi, where do you see?
Wait a minute, Kevin. Looks like Vilmos has a question.
Yeah, Vilmos, go ahead. You have a question or a statement you want to make? Go right ahead.
Yeah. Hey guys. First of all, it's thanks for having the CTO of SMAP Lab, one of the companies that was invited to this call. I used to for 4 years. Looking back, I can still see the spirit of Joi and Jodi doing a lot for the community and trying to change lives for better, which is absolutely fantastic to see. So something that struck me really hard is, I think Jodi, you were sharing your map of Austin. And I quickly did the history check in my mind, and I remembered how back then, in like 5 or 6 years ago, East Austin was, kind of like not the nicest area, not the well-developed area. Like right off East 6, you just went over the highway, and it was pretty, less fortunate than the West Austin. But looking at your map, what I can see is this is extending to the east. And my first thought was that my friends still live in Austin, and there was a bunch of companies, Apple and all the big companies moving there. And my immediate thought is, the reason for this, kind of like poverty levels increasing is also why West Austin, for example, is super green and super happy. So did you guys try to create like a strategic plan or a strategic partnership with the big companies, and then like try to involve them, if you cannot make the policymakers support you with this fight, to invest some kind of incentive, or just like give you money to extend the forestry or extend these parks and these spaces? So I'm really curious, and that's it.
Yeah, that's what we're up to right now, is really reaching out to organizations, companies. Tesla is moving in. There's a group that's reached out to us from that end, but really getting everyone to understand, like developers. We've got a development right next to the food forest, and we're talking to them, knowing that we're increasing their ROI. Like we're benefiting them. All of our hard volunteer work is creating this beautiful lush garden space that their condos and other offerings are going to, they're going to see an impact because of what we're doing. So we're like, all right, come on and be partners.
Yeah.
And they're interested. It's just a little bit of a tenuous, like, this isn't my world. What does it have to do with me? Kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
It's
the, yeah, I
interesting.
mean, and you can have those conversations. I mean, we spent time talking with Facebook and Google and others who have inside food programs within their buildings, within their companies, right? They use third-party companies to help run their facilities and kitchens. They do employee retention, employee engagement, things inside, but those are usually closed universes, and they haven't quite understood how to other than writing a check, right? They don't quite know how to engage that thing or why they should. I think the disaster recovery conversation is a huge one for them because it inflects their employees and their communities very directly, and their access to food. I think some of them see that. Certainly HEB as a company understands that clearly, what that means. And I think some of the other larger corporates have not quite related to their companies yet.
Wait, it's an interesting question, that idea of how do you get these private entities that are benefiting from the work to support what I'll call the commons, right? There's a commons there, and commons being not just the fruitful commons, but also this more general idea. That concept itself is, I think, one of the most important things that we as a community of entrepreneurs can tease out, because if we come up with that, and it feels like it's emerging, just like the commons of open source software has now provided for one of the most powerful disruptive impacts in the world. I think that the same thing is emerging as we start thinking about the commons, about how do we organize, and especially with concepts like in a coming session, we're going to be talking about distributed autonomous organizations that are built on top of the blockchain. The same thing that powers Bitcoin can be used to empower these communities to then say, hey, big corporation, you want to play in our world, you actually have to play by the following rules. It's an interesting thing, and I think that that's something that we have to figure out how to tease out as we look into the future. I'm wondering, so I never want to be too rigid with our timing and all that sort of stuff, but we're coming up against the end of the hour, and sometimes we lose a few people in the studio audience. But I'm wondering, and if you have to step out, totally understand. But I'm wondering, is there any other last minute reflections that you'd like to make sure that we think about as we think about this, or any requests that you'd like to make? Jodi got to make a few requests already. Joi, reflections or request?
Mine's, about how I think the biggest one is, how do we engage what we understand from a technology perspective to help create this ecosystem that's necessary? What do we bring to the table, right? I could talk about products all day long, but how do we get our larger corporate entities to understand that they are linked to this a sector that their employees, that their companies actually do have some dependency on, and that is around food access. And what does that look like? Because I think there is an ROI argument to be made for these companies, whether it's on waste, disaster recovery, employee health, employee retention. You name it. There are a whole bunch of arenas that should compel compel them to become part of this engine and this mechanism as well.
Right, and the reflection about that is it's almost like if you don't have that and you're operating, especially in Austin, Texas, employees will almost reject. Like if you're not doing something positive for the world, social impact, shared prosperity for the world, you won't get the highest.
It's a
You won't get
sustain.
the
It's a
highest value.
sustainability. It is a sustainability
Yeah,
and retention issue, not just a DR and waste issue. No, absolutely.
yeah, exactly. Jodi, what about you? Like just reflections or requests that you'd like to make?
Um, Boy, yeah, I was able to get my requests in. So it's, our organization could certainly use some help. But I think, Kevin, I like that your tagline, people should eat, is out there now. Like, I don't know if this is the inaugural, podcast on this topic, but, just like Joi is doing, and we're trying to do, like, the more that we can bring people together to have these conversations, the better. So I think, if you'd continue to do this and continue to, ask for other guest speakers, Joi and I could
Yeah.
hand you dozens of them.
Yeah, we love to talk to different folks in different channels and related sectors to say you're more related than you can imagine. And I just real quick, you mentioned over in Whisper Valley over there. I think the sector that has recognized this and they're trying to figure out how to make it work is all of you. It is all of your housing, whether it's private residential or whether it's supportive housing done by the city, county, and others. They recognize that part of housing has to be food. That's the only way you're going to get the household stable. And it's
Exactly. Yeah, well, since given that I have had personal experience as a kid with that, and I still know that I carry a lot of those fears that I actually experienced as a child. Like today, on there were weeks that we didn't have. There was probably never more than like a, 3 or 4 days, but 3 or 4 days that we just didn't have, and so I can understand that from a firsthand perspective. There are a couple
I'm
questions
with you.
that,
I'm with you. I'm with you, Kevin. We had the same, and those experiences don't go away when you're not quite sure where your next meal's coming from.
exactly. Well, there's a couple questions that Paul had asked, and I think we've been. I just want to make sure that as we clear out some of the chats, just as we're wrapping up, I'll read the questions and make sure that what we'll do is on the post that we're going to do with this into YouTube, it would be a great place to continue the conversation as well. Paul said, what are some examples of mixed-use residential, agricultural, rural communities around Austin where food production is the focus? And he also asked, I've identified some great properties that become ag-focused, agriculture-focused residential and farming communities. What assistance is available to acquire land and develop a community with water, roads, fields, and septic systems? And Jodi had mentioned back in the chat, Whisper Valley is a keen model. There's a developer in Del Valle that I could connect you to that's looking for the same questions. Part of what I'm going to actually just ask is both. Everyone here is welcome to be a part of the VO community. We have some Slack channels that a lot of this stuff happens. I've noticed that we're getting more traction on the YouTube post afterwards as well, and so I want to make sure I point us to that as well. We're quite honestly, as we're trying to figure out how do we build, this is a little bit more than a community, but it's not a top-down hierarchical organization that's being built, right? There's something that's being built here that's emerging, and since I don't necessarily know what to phrase it, my career has always been at innovation, like at the birthplace of all these different things. So I'm kind of used to, oh wait, I really don't know how this is going to emerge. I was doing e-commerce before e-commerce was cool. Cybersecurity before cybersecurity is cool. Again, all these different things that it feels like this is an emergence about how we continue this conversation. We will have more individuals back to speak about food security. Because the personal scar is deep enough that I'm not going to ever forget it, and because of that, I admire what y'all both are doing, and I'm happy to get to do whatever I can to serve what you're up to as well. I know we did have someone else come in that I thought might actually have something to say as well. RD just mentioned in the chat, please discuss homeless folks living on the street and what their voice sounds like as it relates to this community. One of the things I know about RD's situation is on this program, he's shared a little bit about what it was like to be homeless and to have to go dumpster diving for food. And it got him through it, but really deep scars that I think that with just a little bit of organization of an ecosystem and then taking this model to scale where it's not just Austin, it's not just Central Texas, and not just the 5-state area we talked about earlier, but having models that we can actually cultivate in multiple different places. Like, today with the people that are listening, we have people from Mexico, one from Hungary, obviously a lot in Texas. And it's interesting to think through about how we can figure some of this stuff out and then tease it out from there. Any final words from our two speakers that you'd like to say really quick before we wrap up for this session? And then we'll have a little bit of time to catch up right afterwards after we stop the stream. But any final words that y'all would like to say?
I just really appreciate, this interest, from the entrepreneur community. This is where the innovation, the creativity, out of the box thinking comes in, and it's really something that we could use in this arena.
Yeah, and advocacy to your city council members and to your county commissioners who bring to life some of the things that we talk about through funding and decision making. So that's really the case. We may come up with the ideas, but there is a place for government in that, just as there's a place for our larger corporate friends as well. You need all the parts.
All the parts, definitely. Well, so what we're going to do is I'll make sure that, and each one of you, the question was asked in the chat about where this YouTube will be housed. We'll make sure we share the channel. We'll share that as part of the follow-up as well. And part of the thing to do while we're talking about it is, if you're not already connected into the Tech Ranch community, part of the way to get connected in is go to this URL. Now, this is kind of a clearinghouse URL that has everything from, if you want to sign up as a mentor for the Tech Ranch, if you want to be a country manager, we have country managers all around the world, because part of this network that we're building, is from, like I mentioned earlier, about being in 26 different countries over the last 5 years. We have all sorts of different opportunities to plug in. We have an emerging social network that we're building on top of Mighty Networks. We haven't worked out all the details, but a link is available to that as well. Go to the site and you can get connected in. Get on our email list as well, because part of what's happening is a lot of times I have friends that say, hey, Kevin, you didn't tell me about the following thing. And I'm like, I would love to tell you about it. And also I'm trying to figure out, how do I communicate en masse to lots of people about what's happening, because we now have such movement that it's really, really, really interesting. So get connected here. And then just in a final words for today, it's always an honor to work with entrepreneurs that are driven by visions and values and that are changing the world for the better. So let's go change the world for the better together. Thank you for all of your work. Thank you, Joi and Jodi, for the work that you're doing. It's inspirational for me to get to see what you're up to, and I'm glad to work alongside with you on making the world a better place. So thank you all.
Thank you.